In one experiment, researchers placed teenagers inside a simulated driving game. Their job was simple: drive through a series of intersections and decide whether to stop at a yellow light or risk speeding through before it turned red. When the teenagers played alone, their decisions were not dramatically different from those of adults. Then the researchers changed one small thing. They told the teenagers that their friends were watching. The friends did not shout. They did not dare them to drive faster. They did not even have to be inside the same room. But suddenly the teenagers began taking more risks. The adults barely changed. The teenagers did. Brain scans suggested that being watched by friends made the potential reward of a risky decision feel more exciting. The teenagers still understood the danger, but with an audience present, the risk appeared to become more rewarding. And that experiment reveals something strange about adolescence. Teenagers do not always take risks because they are unable to recognize danger. Sometimes another teenager simply watching can change what the decision feels like. Which raises a much bigger question. Why would evolution create a stage of life in which social approval can become powerful enough to compete with common sense? Why build a human who challenges authority, stays awake when exhausted, becomes obsessed with peer approval, and occasionally attempts something incredibly stupid simply because their friends are nearby? At first glance, adolescence looks like a design flaw, but it may actually be one of the most important transitions evolution ever preserved. And to understand why, we need to stop asking why teenagers behave like broken adults. Because teenagers are not unfinished adults. They are running a different developmental program. Around puberty, the human brain begins a major period of reorganization. Connections that are frequently used become stronger and more efficient. Others are reduced. Networks involved in planning, emotional regulation, social understanding, and decision-making continue changing well beyond the beginning of puberty. But these systems do not all develop at exactly the same speed. During adolescence, rewards, novelty, and social approval can become especially powerful, while the brain networks responsible for long-term planning and self-control are still becoming more coordinated and efficient. This does not mean teenagers have no brakes. It means that the strength of the accelerator can change dramatically depending on the situation. A teenager calmly deciding what to eat for breakfast may appear completely rational. Place that same teenager in front of 5 friends, add excitement, embarrassment, or the possibility of gaining status, and the calculation can change. The danger has not disappeared, but another reward has entered the equation. Being noticed, being admired, being accepted, proving that you belong. For parents and teachers, this can appear irrational, but evolution does not optimize organisms for peaceful family dinners. It favors traits that, on average, helped previous generations survive, adapt, and eventually reproduce, even when those traits carried costs, and adolescence may have helped solve one of the hardest problems every dependent young human eventually faces. How do you stop being a protected child and become an independent member of a larger social world? For years, a human child depends heavily on adults. Someone else provides food, someone else identifies danger, someone else decides where to go, whom to trust, and what rules to follow. That dependence is necessary because human childhood is unusually long. We have enormous amounts to learn before we can function independently. But permanent dependence would create another problem. At some point, a young person must begin exploring beyond their parents. They must practice making decisions without constant supervision. They must form relationships outside the family. They must learn where they fit within a wider community. They must attempt difficult things before they are guaranteed to succeed. A brain designed only to avoid risk would be excellent at remaining safe near its parents. It would be terrible at becoming independent. So adolescence may temporarily change the balance. New experiences become more attractive. Peer relationships become more emotionally important. Embarrassment becomes painful. Acceptance becomes rewarding. And the world outside the family begins pulling harder than the safety of staying exactly where you are. This does not mean evolution deliberately designed teenagers like an engineer designing a machine. Evolution has no plan, but across generations, developmental patterns that encouraged exploration, learning, and wider social participation may have offered enough advantages to persist despite their dangers. And humans are not the only animals to show parts of this pattern. Adolescent rodents, for example, can display increased novelty seeking and unusually intense social play compared with younger or fully mature animals. Researchers use these changes to study how developing reward and social systems influence behavior during the transition toward adulthood. The exact behaviors differ between species. A teenage rat is not worried about being excluded from a group chat, but the broader challenge is similar. Move away from complete dependence. Explore unfamiliar environments. Interact with peers. Learn adult roles. And do it before you have decades of experience. Humans turned that transition into something far more complicated because human survival has always depended on more than physical strength. We survive through relationships, cooperation, reputation, trust, shared knowledge, alliances, knowing who will help you and who will not. For most of human history, being accepted by a group was not merely good for your self-esteem. It could affect your access to protection, food, information, partners, and support. Being rejected could be dangerous. So when a teenager feels as though social humiliation is the end of the world, that reaction is not appearing from nowhere. The modern situation may be small, but the social alarm system is ancient. This also explains why teenagers can appear to become different people in front of their friends. Imagine an ancient young person attempting a difficult climb, joining a hunt, or demonstrating a new skill. Success would not only accomplish the task, it could also demonstrate courage, competence, and usefulness to the group. The audience mattered. Showing off was not always pointless. Sometimes it was evidence. Evidence that you could contribute. Evidence that you were brave. Evidence that you might become a valuable ally, competitor, or partner. That does not mean every reckless teenage decision is secretly useful. Many are simply dangerous, but it helps explain why the presence of peers can increase the emotional reward attached to taking the chance. And peer influence is not automatically negative. The same sensitivity that can encourage a stupid risk can also encourage generosity, courage, achievement, and cooperation when those behaviors are valued by the group. Studies suggest that peers can amplify positive and pro-social behavior as well as risky behavior. The adolescent brain is not simply programmed to copy bad decisions. It is unusually sensitive to social rewards, and the direction of that influence depends partly on what the surrounding group celebrates. A teenager surrounded by people who admire dangerous behavior may take greater risks. A teenager surrounded by people who admire skill, discipline, or kindness may work harder to display those traits. The system is not inherently destructive, it is socially responsive. But there is a problem. The world in which this system developed is not the world teenagers live in today. For most of human history, the social audience was limited. A mistake might be witnessed by a few members of your community. Approval came from people you physically knew. Humiliation eventually faded as attention moved somewhere else. Today, the audience can follow a teenager everywhere. Inside their bedroom, inside their pocket, in their schools, onto the bus, and into the middle of the night. A teenager no longer performs only for the people standing nearby. They can perform for hundreds, thousands, or millions of strangers. A risky decision can be recorded. A humiliating moment can be replayed. A numerical score, views, likes, followers, or comments, can turn social approval into something visible and endlessly measurable. The ancient system that once helped young humans enter a wider community now operates inside a world where the community has almost no boundary. And modern technology can increase the physical consequences too. An ancestral teenager attempting to impress friends might have climbed higher, traveled farther, or challenged someone stronger. A modern teenager can combine the same desire for approval with a fast car, an online challenge, or an audience encouraging them from thousands of kilometers away. The motivation may be ancient. The scale is completely new. This is why describing teenagers as simply irrational misses the point. Many teenagers can reason about danger perfectly well when they are calm. They can explain what the safer decision is. They can predict what might go wrong. But human decisions are not made by logic alone. They are made by brains calculating several forms of value at once. Safety has value. Excitement has value. Status has value. Belonging has value. And during adolescence, social value can become extraordinarily loud. That intensity can be exhausting for everyone involved. Parents may feel as though the child who once trusted them has suddenly rejected everything they say. Teenagers may feel trapped between wanting protection and desperately needing independence. Both can be true at once. Pulling away does not necessarily mean the relationship has failed. It may be part of the developmental transition itself. The teenager is beginning to build an identity that cannot remain entirely borrowed from their parents. That requires disagreement, experimentation, occasional embarrassment, and enough freedom to make some decisions badly. None of this means dangerous behavior should be ignored. Understanding why a system exists does not mean accepting every result it produces. Hunger evolved for a reason, but it can still lead us toward food that harms us. Fear evolved for a reason, but it can still activate when no real danger exists, and adolescent sensitivity to reward and peer approval may have supported exploration and social learning, while also creating genuine vulnerability to harmful decisions. Evolution does not create perfect solutions. It creates trade-offs. Teenagers gain the motivation to explore, connect, and separate from childhood dependence. But that motivation arrives before experience has taught them the cost of every possible mistake. That is the bargain. Adolescence may be a temporary explorer mode, a period when the familiar becomes less satisfying, when the wider world becomes more attractive, when peers become powerful, when independence begins to feel worth the danger. It was not built for social media. It was not built for highways. It was not built for an audience that never goes home. But underneath the arguments, the showing off, the intensity, and the occasional terrible decision is a developmental system attempting to accomplish something essential. Turn a protected child into a person capable of entering the larger world. Evolution did not make teenagers broken, but modern life may have given an ancient transition system consequences it was never prepared to handle. The teenager was built to face a bigger world. The problem is that the world became far bigger than evolution could ever have imagined.